call on you, Holy Spirit, hear my plea.
We're starting a series of lessons tonight entitled Getting to Know Jesus. We're going to try to look at some things that will help us to really understand who He is and what He claims and why that's so important for us to know.
And I feel so small. Lift me up, Lord, but let my spirit stand tall.
Jesus is the light of the world. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate of the sheep."
Shine your light.
It's very important for us to consider this information because when you read the text, it only says that the tomb was open and empty, and that the disciples, Peter and John, went and looked inside the tomb and saw the grave clothes lying there, but saw the face scarf neatly folded up in a place by itself. And when you read that, it doesn't give you all of the information that you need to be able to draw a real conclusion from this. But we're going to look at this very thoroughly tonight and give you some information that will really help you to make a decision about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're going to look first of all at some testimonies of some scholars. The first one is Dr. Simon Greenleaf. He's Royal Professor of Law at Harvard University, Dane Professor of Law at Harvard University, and author of a treatise on the law of evidence in 3 volumes. Very intelligent man. And he says, according to the laws of legal evidence used in courts of law, there's more evidence for the historical fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ than for just about any other event in history. What a marvelous statement for a man like that to make. Professor Thomas Arnold, who's 14 years headmaster of rugby and holder of the chair of modern history at Oxford, says, "I have for many years studied the histories of other times and examined and weighed the evidence of those who've written about them. And I know of no other fact in the history of mankind which is proved by better and fuller evidence of every sort to the understanding of a fair inquirer than the great sign which God hath given us, that Christ died and rose again from the dead." Then Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Darling, said, "No intelligent jury in the world could fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true." What a marvelous statement that these men are making. John Singleton Copley, who's better known as Lord Lyndhurst, recognized as one of the greatest legal minds in British history, Solicitor General of the British government, Attorney General of Great Britain, 3 times High Chancellor of England, and elected as High Steward of the University of Cambridge. He says, "I know pretty well what evidence is, and I tell you such evidence as that for the resurrection has never broken down yet." The last one we're going to look at is Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Caldicot. He says this, "My faith began with and was grounded on what I thought was revealed in the Bible. When particularly I came to the New Testament, the Gospels and other writings of the men who have been friends of Jesus Christ seemed to me to make an overwhelming case, merely as a matter of strict evidence for the fact therein stated. The same approach to the cardinal tests of the claims of Jesus Christ, namely His resurrection, has led me as often as I've tried to examine the evidence to believe it as a fact beyond dispute." Wow. All of those statements give us some information from some very intelligent, important men who say, "I've looked at the evidence and the evidence is conclusive." We're going to consider the second part of the evidence tonight from the burial tomb, the grave clothes, the resurrection evidence from the burial tomb itself. The New Testament has been repeatedly verified as a reliable historical record. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have all been found to be solid, true witnesses of the events that happened in Jesus' life, and they're reporting exactly what happened. They didn't contact each other and try to make up their stories. They wrote from different parts of the world at different times in history, and they all say the same thing. In their historical accounts, the gospel writers used the evidence of Jesus' empty burial tomb to prove that he indeed rose from the dead. The resurrection issue is of vital importance to the Christian. Christianity stands or falls on the truthfulness of Jesus' resurrection. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then the Christian's faith is futile, for it to be based on a lie. The facts. The first fact is the stone was removed. Then the tomb was opened, and the Jesus' body was gone. And the last one is the grave clothes, the linen wrappings were still lying. That's important to us tonight. And we're going to examine that and really look at the evidence and see what that evidence is telling us. The tomb looks something like this. A huge stone rolled down into the entrance of that tomb, closed the entrance. Leather straps across it with a wax seal in the center of the leather straps, and the guard puts his signet ring in there, and it puts the emperor's head on the stone. And this is now property of Rome, and you don't mess with Rome's tomb. If you do, you're going to die. And the soldiers that are there, 16 of them, a serious group of men, armed and ready for battle, are going to be guarding this tomb all during these 3 days. Now the grave clothes, it says both of the men were running to the tomb. The other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but didn't go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. Now the linen cloths are all lying there, and this cloth had been around Jesus' head to hold his jaws shut. The cloth was folded up neatly in a place by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. What he believed now is that the body is gone, because it looked like when he first came there and didn't go in, he approached the tomb and he looked inside, stooping to look inside, and saw the grave clothes lying and didn't go in because he assumed, oh, the body's still there. But then Peter went in and examined it, and then John went in and examined, and then he believed, yeah, they've taken the body out of the tomb. It's not here anymore. Evidence of the linen wrappings themselves. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate granted permission. So he came and took his body. Nicodemus, who had come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes. Notice how much this is. About 100 pounds weight. That's a lot of myrrh and aloes. And so they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. We're going to examine what this text is really saying and look at the evidence and make some conclusions of our own. The linen wrappings themselves. The specific words used by John in his description of the action taken by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus are significant. He said they bound Jesus' body in linen wrappings. We're going to look at the word bound, and we're going to look at the word linen wrappings. The Greek word for bound is adison. It means to bind up, wrap up, or tie up. And then the linen wrappings, what are they? The Greek word translated linen wrappings is orthanosios, and it's plural, and it means strips of cloth, swaths or bandages, all made out of linen. So they had strips of linen cloth, and they had this myrrh and aloes here ready to put these cloth strips in and wrap the body in it. But we're going to look first of all at the spices that they're going to use. The balsamum and myrrh that they use is a highly fragrant resin that contains a volatile oil. It actually comes from the balsamum and myrrh tree. And it's the sap that comes out of the tree. And the resin is at first oily, but it hardens after it's exposed to air, and the oil evaporates rapidly. So it's a very volatile oil that's very thick, and it's sticky, and then there's 100 pounds of this with the aloes mixed with it. Now the aloes is another interesting thing. It's a fragrant wood pounded or reduced to dust. The chief value of the aloes was their fragrance. However, they too consisted of an oily resin. What are they for? Well, they're going to mix this pounded up dust into the myrrh, and it's going to make a thick, gooey stuff, like you put on in strips of paper and put on a light bulb. You know, the thing you make these. We did in art when I was in grade school. We made those. I forget what you call them, huh?
Paper mache.
Yeah, paper mache. It's kind of like paper mache, only it's different. And the oil is very oily, and this is thick. And then when the myrrh and aloes were mixed together, they formed a type of adhesive which bonded the linen wrappings together. Now, the myrrh is, the aloes is for the smell, so that you help cover up the smell of decay, and it's not offensive then. You don't smell the body decaying inside of it, and it decays much slower because no air can get in. The burial custom of the Jews was this. Jesus was buried according to the Jewish burial customs of the day, at least for those who were well off financially. Jesus wasn't well off financially, but Joseph of Arimathea was very well off. And so Jesus was buried in Joseph's tomb, like Joseph would have been buried. The burial custom of the Jews in that day was to wrap the body with the strips of linen, similar to the manner in which the Egyptians wrapped their dead bodies and made mummies. The Encyclopedia Americana explains, specifically, a dead body was preserved from putrefaction. In the time of Christ, it was the manner of the Jews to bury the body bound in linen cloths with spices. Jesus was wrapped in linen spices. 100 pounds of paste-like spices were placed between the linen strips, completely saturating them. When it all dried, the body was enclosed in a hard cast. Now, first of all, they take the body and they lay it on the slab, on the shroud, the linen shroud that was there, which is 14 feet long, 3 feet wide. They lay the body on the shroud, and then they wrap the shroud over the body. Then they take these linen wrappings, and they wrap them around this from head to toe, completely, the whole thing. When they're finished with it, it's like a hard cast. And then it dries in 3 days. The 3 days that in a tomb, it would dry some. It wouldn't have dried completely. It wouldn't have been completely hard, but it would have been hard enough that it would have kept the linen intact. And that's what it did. It left the linen wrappings as if they were still folded all up. Lazarus was buried the same way. Just as Jesus, Lazarus too was buried according to the burial custom of the Jews. It says he was bound hand and foot with wrappings. His face was still wrapped with a linen cloth when he came out of the tomb. He was unable to see. Now, he didn't come walking out of the tomb. He just comes back out of the grave, out of the dead, into the body. And then Jesus says to them, unbind him and let him go. If he hadn't unbind him and let him go, he'd die again, because he would have suffocated inside of there. But it says his face was still wrapped with the linen cloth when he came out of the tomb. He was unable to see. Together with this, he was incapable of getting himself loose. It was for this reason that Jesus commanded those close by, go by and unbind him and let him go. The position of the linen wrappings. John 20, verse 5. John saw the linen wrappings, i.e. the mummy cast, still lying there. There's no indication that they were torn apart at all. It's still lying as if it were still wrapped up. Peter saw the mummy cast still lying there. There is no indication that it was disheveled. However, the face cloth was not still lying there. It was neatly aside and rolled up. Now, it should have been inside there, but somehow it got out of the grave clothes and is on the outside, and Jesus took it off and folded it up and laid it over neatly by itself. I'm sure that God did that for the disciples' benefit, so that they would know that the body is not in there. John 25, verse 5, John outran Peter, beating him to the tomb. For some reason, he wasn't in such a hurry to enter the tomb when he arrived. Our question would be, why didn't John enter the tomb? What did he see that would have made him kind of hesitate? He thought the body was still all there. He didn't think the body was gone because it looked like the body is still in the tomb. What did the disciples really see? Peter entered the tomb, saw and believed. He believed what Mary had told him in verse 2. They've taken away the Lord out of the tomb. Mary was in error. She thought Jesus' enemies had taken his body. The disciples didn't yet know that Jesus had risen from the dead. They didn't know that yet. What did the disciples see in the tomb? What did they see there? They saw the empty shell of a mummy cast. No one had torn it apart to get at the body. Jesus' body had simply vanished from it, yet the face cloth had been neatly put in a place by itself. Jesus had been in no hurry if he took the time to do that. No wonder John decided not to enter the tomb before Peter. He was spooked by what he saw when he peeked in and saw the body lying there, he thought. Now, how did Jesus get out of the grave clothes? How did the grave clothes remain all bound up in the tomb and the body gone? How'd that happen? Well, a few years ago, there was a scientific program, a science fiction program on television. You remember the guy that would say, "Beam us up, Scotty"? You remember that? They would go into this machine and their body would transform from the body into energy and pass out of the machine and go places. So the body, we even imagined doing that in that science fiction movie on TV. But the fact is, Jesus' body could be done that way. He vanished inside of those clothes and appeared on the outside of them, took off the face scarf, rolled it up and laid it neatly aside, and then vanished out of the tomb. And then on the outside of the tomb, he's there when Mary comes, and the tomb is open, and the angel of the Lord comes and opens the tomb and says, "Look, his body's already gone." He'd already gone out of the tomb. So he had vanished out of the tomb. How did he vanish like that? I don't know how God does those things. I don't know what our body's going to be like when we're raised from the dead, but it's going to be like his. And we'll be able to do the same things that he was. But the thing of it is, he was able to transform his body from matter to energy at will. And he did it several times. We'll see that later. According to the swoon theory, Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He simply fainted. Then after regaining consciousness in the cool of the tomb, he walked away. There was a guy in Italy who dreamed up this swoon theory. He said Jesus just fainted on the cross, passed out. They thought he was dead, took him down, prepared him for burial, and then during the time he was in the tomb, in the cool dampness of the tomb, he awoke and escaped and went off into India and got married and had children there. What a crazy kind of theory. The Muslims use that too. They use that same theory, and they say that he didn't die in the tomb, that he just swooned and he woke up in the tomb and rolled away the stone and got away. But we're going to see that whole thing is just a false theory. Let's look at the fallacies of this theory. The swoon theory consists of erroneous speculation. It's not based on any fact at all. The swoon theory contradicts the facts as we have them recorded in history. Here are the facts of history. Matthew said Jesus yielded up his spirit. He said he died. Mark said he breathed his last. Luke said he breathed his last. And John said he gave up his spirit. All of the disciples say he died. Not only that, the soldiers knew that Jesus was dead. That's why they didn't break his legs. The breaking of the legs caused the suffocation of the two thieves on either side of Jesus, and they suffocated because they couldn't push themselves up with their legs in order to breathe. So the soldiers came, it says, and broke the legs of the first man and of the other who was crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when they saw he was already dead, they didn't break his legs. The soldiers knew that Jesus was already dead. But the centurion who was there, when he saw the way Jesus died, he's standing right there in front of the cross. Now, imagine Jesus being crucified. The cross is probably on a pole that's about 16 feet long. It's about a 16-foot long pole. And then it has a cross pole at the top. You have to put 4 feet of that in the earth, because it's going to have to hold it up. So that only leaves 12 feet up. So this Jesus' feet are about 4 feet off the ground. So his head's about right there. So the guard is standing there, the centurion standing there looking him right in the face. And when he says, his last breath is tetelestai, which means it's finished, and he didn't breathe again. He was just frozen. Didn't breathe out, didn't breathe in. And the centurion standing there, when he saw that he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The centurion observed Jesus at the moment he died. He referred to Jesus in the past tense, was, which indicates his physical life had expired. The centurion says he's dead. The soldiers all agreed that he was dead. But the Pilate also agreed that he was dead. Joseph of Arimathea came, a prominent member of the council, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God, and he gathered up courage and went in before Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate wondered if he was dead by this time. It was only 3 days. No one had ever died on the cross that soon. Most people died 4 to 6 days on a cross because they died of suffocation. They didn't die of injuries of the cross. They died because they couldn't breathe. And so no one had died that soon. Jesus died in 6 hours. So wondering he was dead by this time and summoning the centurion, he questioned him as to whether he was already dead. And ascertaining this from the centurion, he gave the body to Joseph. Pilate knew that Jesus was dead. Pilate made sure that Jesus was dead before he gave the body to Joseph. The soldiers then pierced Jesus' side, you remember? But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately the Gospel of John says blood and water came out. Blood and water separated already. The blood had already separated. The Roman pike that was used to spear his side, they were armed with a spear called the Roman pike. The wooden shaft was at least 6 feet long. The spearhead itself was as long as 3 feet. The edges of the spearhead were jagged. The pierce alone would have killed Jesus if he wasn't already dead. The guard takes his spear and rams it in Jesus' side. Now, his head's about right there. His side's right here. He just takes it, rams that up in his side. When he pulls it out, the blood and water come streaming out of the side. He doesn't bleed. The blood and water just float out. That's because the blood had already gathered in a sac around the heart. You know, the pericardium that's around the heart. The blood had all gathered in there. And when the guard stuck his spear in there, it pierced that, and all of that blood and water ran out. The blood and water flowed from the wound which is inflicted in the Jesus body by the Roman pike. This is a sure sign of a dead body. Half the blood in our bodies is composed of red or white blood corpuscles, cells. The other half of our blood consists of clear fluid called plasma. So his blood corpuscles had separated from the blood plasma. His body was dead. He's dead in there. The physical condition of Jesus' body makes his death an unquestionable fact. After being battered by scourging and torn by crucifixion, it was then mutilated by the Roman's pike. How in the world could he have survived that? Let's say he did. The swoon theory says he survived that and just passed out on the cross, and then in the cool dampness of the tomb awoke. Well, now let's examine that. After all of that is done, and he's already been declared dead by the gospel writers and by Pilate and by the centurion and by the soldiers who buried him, who crucified him. he then is buried in the tomb. And Joseph of Arimathea and his partner Nicodemus wrap the body with linen straps. After they've wrapped the body doesn't have any air in there any longer. It's now a cocoon that's airtight. If he's alive when they bury him, when they prepare him for burial, he's going to die in 4 minutes after he's in that thing. But let's say he didn't. Let's say he did wake up. How's he going to get out of there? He's bound hand and foot in those linen straps. How's he going to break out of that? But he doesn't. They're all still wrapped up when Peter and John go to the tomb. It's all still there. It looks like the body's still in it. There's no way he could have survived any of that. He died on the cross, and he was buried in the tomb, and they buried a dead body. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus would have known if he'd not been dead. They wouldn't have buried him there. Those who claim that Jesus revived in the cool of the tomb must respond to the following questions. First of all, how did Jesus survive? How did Jesus free himself from the cast that's surrounding his body? How did he free himself from that? And how did Jesus get out of that secured tomb? How did Jesus escape the 16 Roman soldiers who were waiting outside the tomb with their Roman pikes to kill anybody who came to take the body? And after Jesus was battered by scourging, torn by crucifixion, mutilated by a Roman pike, if anyone wanted to maintain that he survived and with nearly destroyed body was able somehow to escape from a body cast without harming it, find his way to the secured stone and somehow roll it away from the inside of a dark tomb, and then defeat 16 armed Roman soldiers, they'd have to say this person was only a supernatural human who could have done that. A regular human couldn't have done that. No way. Let's look at a summary of this. And so what John is saying, here's the reason for believing. The tomb was empty, the grave clothes were lying, the napkin was rolled up in a place by itself. Such evidence as that is undeniable. What is the function of reason? It's to sit in judgment on the evidence, the facts in the case, and to draw a reasonable conclusion that agrees with the claim. That's what your brain is for. Look at the facts, draw a conclusion that agrees. Christ claimed to be the Son of God, and eyewitnesses claimed to see him for 40 days after the resurrection. What does the evidence say? What does your reason conclude? To conclude that Christ was raised is a logical deduction. You don't have to drop your brain to become a Christian. Use it. Use your brain. Since Jesus did actually rise from the dead, the following two implications have been proven. First, Jesus is the Son of God. That's true. Second, Jesus' death was a redemptive act of God. He did that to redeem us from sin. Jesus died, was buried according to the Jewish burial customs. Jesus' friends didn't steal his body. Jesus' enemies didn't take his body. Jesus rose from the dead just as he said he would. Christianity stands and the Christian faith is affirmed. The salvation of all those who've obeyed Jesus is assured. You don't have to worry about that. He's ruling and reigning at the right hand of the throne of God, and you know it. The tomb is still empty. The body of Jesus is still gone. No one has ever found a body of Jesus, ever, anywhere, anytime. I believe that the evidence from the burial tomb is true, and that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John told us the truth. And they tell us history, and that history is factual. And when Jesus was raised from the dead, just telling the tomb was open, the tomb was empty, and the grave clothes was left there was enough for them. But we have a lot more evidence to look at. Next week we're going to look at the evidence of the change of the apostles at Pentecost, how that change in their lives declares that Jesus is raised from the dead. What were they like before he was raised from the dead? And what were they like after that? God bless you as you continue this study.